you're charged with, a huge part of the job is keeping the trains running on time.
Yeah.
Just how do like what are all those little pieces that are going to help us do a better job? But you're often, just at least the schools I've worked at, and I think this is pretty universal. Like in a lot of those roles, things are just coming at you all the time, and so you have to be reactive. You have to respond. That's where like good systems help because you have a default setting and you can kind of just work within the system you have. It allows you to just treat people as humans, but it doesn't leave time for the strategic, big term thinking or longer term thinking. And becoming a head of a school, that's arguably, if not the most important, right in that small handful of things that are the most important for the head of a school to be involved in, because you're now working with a board of trustees. You are shaping that. You're going to have a larger voice in all those conversations. And I've had to learn, just simple things like having, in terms of shaping my calendar, I have to block out longer periods of time where I can be, uninterrupted so that I can have, at least that's how it works for me, is like I need to be able to get into sort of a deeper state of thinking about things to think strategically.
So, welcome, my fellow school leaders. I'm Avinash Bansal, co founder at Tomo Club. And today, in our Tomo Club podcast series of Leaders of Tomorrow, we have the head of school from the Walker School in Marietta, Georgia, Carlson. Thank you so much for joining in today.
Thank you for having me.
Before doing this podcast, I did a little bit research, and your 3 decades in independent school education, and your definitely disruptive changes that you have brought in, but at the same time, a quieter kind of leadership. And that's one of the interesting topics, that the quiet side of leadership and how do you build better school from inside out. So it's not always about flashy or, PR things, but a lot of things that go in the background. I think that a lot of people do not recognize or identify, which we want to do today. And before we get started, I would love to know if you can give a background about your journey in education.
Sure. I am a third generation educator. My grandfather was a university professor. My parents were independent school teachers, and they worked in a boarding school in Massachusetts. So I actually grew up on a school campus. And had a moment in, I think, 10th grade where I was sitting in a math class and thought, I want to be like that guy up at the front of the room, and decided I wanted to be a teacher. And so I went to college with that intention. And when I graduated, I started my educational career in independent schools. I started at a school called St. Mark's School, which is a small boarding school outside of Boston. I was a math teacher and coached sports and lived with kids in the dorm and loved everything about that experience. Met another young faculty member who was teaching at the school and fell in love, and we got married and moved to another boarding school called the Taft School, which is in Watertown, Connecticut. And we spent 18 years there. Both of us worked there. I taught economics. I coached basketball. I very quickly I knew I wanted to journey into administration. And I had actually, in my last year at St. Mark's, took a leave of absence, but I lived at the school and continued dorm duty. And I went to graduate school full time and got a master's degree in education. So then I got married and went to Taft, and with a hope that I would move into administration. And I sort of took a slow process of doing that. Became an assistant dean of students, a fancy title to give you all the lousy jobs and make you feel important. And then became a class dean. So I worked with juniors in high school in an administrative oversight role. And I loved all the pieces that I did. Then I became a dean of students and did that for 9 years. And a dean of students in a boarding school means that the phone can ring at any moment, day or night, when a student's on campus. And that it's a tough job, but I really love that also because you get to shape student culture in really powerful, profound ways. And you actually, when a student makes a mistake and gets in trouble for something, you can help them. Their brain opens up to learning in a way that it doesn't on a typical day-to-day basis in a classroom or on a basketball court. And I've got great satisfaction out of helping someone in a really low moment sort of go through that, try to do it with dignity and and care, but also while being firm and holding high expectations and navigating that. And then I sort of hit a point where I think I hit my sort of career ceiling at Taft because the positions I might want to grow into were filled and people weren't going to be leaving anytime soon. And I took for me, a very radical shift. My wife and I decided that our oldest son was nearing high school, and it was time for us to. We didn't want to send our own son to our own. We have three boys, and we didn't want to send them to boarding school. And so we thought, why? Maybe this is time for us to try a day school model. And I met an incredible educator named Kevin Plummer at a conference, and he was and is head of school at Tampa Preparatory School in Tampa, Florida, which I had not even heard about before I met Kevin. And the opportunity to be a high school division head sort of presented itself, and I took a risk and moved from a very sort of old, traditional, really excellent boarding school to a school that was young. It was in Florida. It was in a right downtown Tampa. It was in an urban setting. And their mission was very, very different. They embraced innovation in sort of every way. And so I felt a little bit liberated being in that position, and did that for 9 years, running through the pandemic, and loved every minute of that job. Well, maybe not all the pandemic, but and really built the sort of idea of innovation into my own model in a more meaningful way of really, if someone has an idea, they deserve an audience, and trying to sort of pick ideas from a much wider base, not just top down, was a really a very powerful sort of shift in how I thought about leadership. Taking a good idea and bringing it to life is a lot easier than having to do it all on your own, start to finish. Yeah. And that's sort of self-evident. But and then I decided I wanted to take the next step and lead a school. And that's what led me to the Walker School in Marietta, Georgia, which is a pre-K through 12 day school of just under 1,000 students. And I'm in my fourth year. And Walker falls somewhere a little bit in between the sort of super progressive Tampa Prep and the very traditional Taft, in a way that I'm very comfortable with and have enjoyed, and it's been a great 4 years so far.
Wow,
that wasn't too long.
No, I love that. I think that definitely paint a picture in my head of your journey, and I love that it's from bottom to top journey, and that's something which I have seen across the US, that it's not like an examination and you can become a head of school. You have to go from the ground up. So the understanding of the reality is very evidently there, which I highly appreciate. And I'm glad you shifted your stance from lousy to difficult, because it's not an easy job what you have done, especially in a boarding school, which is a whole different ball game, because you said you have to be 24/7 available. So perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that story. But what really interests me is that the reason that you initially thought of schooling system, the reason that you thought I want to join in, is that reason still valid after 30 years, or how has that reason evolved?
That day when I was in 10th grade, when I'm sitting in a math class, I'd grown up around education, so it was very comfortable for me, but it was really that person is impacting my life holistically, not just as a math, not just I'm learning equations, but like I want to be like that person. And I want to be able to make a difference the way I felt like that person, his name is John Choate, the way he was making a difference in my life. And so that I think is a constant throughout my life, and that I want to be in a position to make a difference in people's lives. I will say, when I first started, I think I thought of it exclusively at the student level of being able to make a difference in students' lives, and that hasn't changed. But as I've sort of gotten older and gone through my own journey, it's also about all the employees at the school and the parents, and it's the community that I think about is much bigger than it was when I first started. But I think the sort of the intention and the reason I got into it hasn't changed.
That's brilliant, and I'm glad it didn't. But also, like, when we initially build a story in our head that if I become this person, I'll do this and that, and I'll have these many ideas. So I would love to know, uh, how has that shaped up? You know, how has your understanding of the US, not US in general, your schooling system, how has that evolved over the years?
Interesting question. I'm pausing because I am in the moment right now, and I always try to live in the moment.
Yeah.
Um, I, Part of it, I think, and this is true in any field or anything, like just experience and reps are critical. So, the world was a different place in 1990 when I started
Yeah.
my career in education. The seismic change in education that year was that graphing calculators were coming out, and we were trying to figure out how to use those. And being 22 years old, I was very comfortable with the idea of like, I didn't have a previous frame of reference. Great, graphing calculators seem really powerful. I was a math and econ major. I want to, this makes sense to me that we'd use this tool. And I saw a lot of colleagues for whom it was new and kind of scary. I think that whatever the next thing is, and it was whether it's the internet coming in and how do we use this new tool, or the today it's AI, just that sort of how do you process something that's new and scary. It can be scary, and what I've learned through my journey is like when something's new, try not to start from a place of fear. Try to start from a place of curiosity around it, because the world is going to happen outside of a school. We can't control that at all. And
Yeah.
if you sort of put your head in the sand, you're not going to be doing your job the way you should to help prepare the students and faculty and anybody else to embrace these new changes. So we're in it right now with AI,
Mm.
and navigating that, and it's different in some ways, but the same to a lot of other changes that I've sort of learned to navigate either on my own as a teacher or in a leadership role throughout my journey.
No, I agree with that 100%. We'll definitely come back to AI. That's an important segment itself.
Yep,
Um, so this journey, this is the last time I'm putting you back in nostalgia, or
it's okay.
but I would love to know what are your core leadership style look like, because you must have picked up few things that worked, that didn't work, uh, but you must have created a playbook for yourself.
Yeah.
So
That's a question I've always struggled with in job interviews along the ways. What is your leadership style, and having a one word answer. Like, I would say for me, it's just been a very organic process over time. And trying to take the things I've learned along the way and make it holistic. So I would say from like 18 years I spent at Taft School in Connecticut, they like the power of sort of a very holistic education approach to education, and that we're not just teaching content, we're teaching humans how to be better humans and better students, and the importance of character. And then the other piece is the power of really strong systems, which sounds technical, but if you I took for granted, I don't think I realized how important having a good system to do something is. So just how do we uh, navigate our students taking overnight trips? So that's just something I've been in a conversation with recently at my school, which
mhm,
might seem very small. But if you don't have a sort of process and system that's in place, then each time you're sending someone out on a trip, you're sort of making it up as you go, or you're just relying on sort of narrative and people sharing information. And so powerful systems, like really thoughtful, intelligent systems, became something that I started thinking about a lot more, and I enjoy helping to design. Transition from eighth to ninth grade. That was something that was always a problem in schools. Like it's
yeah,
a new, they're coming to new school. Well, how do you onboard them? What is that process? How do you be intentional about that and have a sort of a game plan? So that's one piece that I think early on I started to identify that, and that's not the human side. That's just that's the fallback.
mhm,
Um, I think from being a coach for a long time, um, I really, really value people who are willing to well, I'll start with talent. You win more basketball games if you have better talent. You
Yeah.
do a better job teaching if you have better talent. So how do you attract talent? How do you cultivate talent? How do you put people in a position to grow? Um, and so talent is certainly important, but the culture that you put that talent in is critically important. And so ultimately, like piece together these different parts. And then my time at Tampa Prep, and I touched on this earlier, it's the importance of being open-minded and not sort of not relying on a top-down approach to leadership and growth. So I have woven together all those different pieces, and I do think that fundamentally, you sort of early on, right off the bat, talked about quiet leadership.
Yeah.
I believe that one of the challenges that we have to, the way I think about leadership is like in any day at work. So today I'm going to have, tens of decisions to make,
Hmm.
big and small, most of them small, some of them big. Um, and getting like, a really high percentage of those right. So anytime you make a decision, does that decision result in a little gain in the school? The sort of the concept of like trying to get 1% better every day.
Hmm.
Um, those little things multiply on each other. And so in a hiring season, how can we come out of it with a stronger faculty than we had, going into it? In interactions with kids, are there ways for us to do our job better in terms of the student experience? One of the reasons you go to conferences or go to visit other schools is, can you find ideas that are working, bring them back, and constantly be trying to find those like small gains that then multiply rather than just trying to hit a home run with one thing.
Hmm.
So I don't know what the label is that describes all that. um, but that's sort of how I think about my job is like, and ultimately I want the best team of people, the people who report directly to me that I'm interfacing with on a regular basis. I want to make sure we're all pulling in the same direction, that we're not working in silos, and that I'm letting them go out and do their job really well. And it's not, it may not always be the way I would have done things, and learning to let go some of that along my journey of, just because it's not the way I would have done it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Because if you have people who feel empowered and feel passionate about what they do, they're going to find paths that work really well.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And giving my opinion on what quiet leadership look like. So if you ever go to a car rental spot, right, or if you go to a, let's say, airport or hospital or school, if I see the people who are working there are able to manage different kind of situations by themselves, and there's no boss dictating around or throwing people in different directions, then I believe that the leadership over there is much more sound, much more quiet. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And whenever I see anywhere where the employees have to go back and forth to take any small approvals, so I'm like, these situations must have occurred to you on a daily basis. So why haven't
Mm-hmm.
you created a process out of it so that the employee doesn't need to bother the senior every time?
Right.
And I think that's
Yeah.
a failure of a leadership rather than the person at the front desk. And so that's why when I kind of divide a leadership style, it's into two parts. One is how are you managing everyday tasks, and the second one is how are you leading an organization towards next frontier.
Yes.
Because
Yep.
if you're too involved in daily tasks, you can never think of a macro picture.
Yep.
So I would love your inputs on that part.
I would say that actually was probably one of the biggest challenges in moving from being a division head to being a head of a school.
Hmm.
Being a dean of students, being a division head. You're charged with a huge part of the job is keeping the trains running on time.
Yeah.
Just how do like what are all those little pieces that are going to help us do a better job? But you're often just at least the schools I've worked at, and I think this is pretty universal, like in a lot of those roles, things are just coming at you all the time. And so you have to be reactive, you have to respond. That's where like good systems help, because you have a default setting and you can kind of just work within the system you have. It allows you to just treat people as humans, but it doesn't leave time for the strategic big term thinking and or longer term thinking, and becoming a head of a school, that's arguably, if not the most important, right in that small handful of things that are the most important for the head of a school to be involved in, because you're now working with a board of trustees, you are shaping that, you're going to have a larger voice in all those conversations. And I've had to learn, just simple things like having, in terms of shaping my calendar, I have to block out longer periods of time where I can be, uninterrupted, so that I can have, at least that's how it works for me, is like I need to be able to get into sort of a deeper state of thinking about things to think strategically. No, I have really great coach that I work with that I thought would just be a transition, someone to help me with a transition into being a head of school. And, 3.5 years in, I still have that relationship, and that person plays a really important role for me. And just helping me sort of, keep recentering on, okay, think about those longer term goals. How are you sharing that with your team and your faculty and the school, so that everybody is pulling in the same direction. So that was the biggest change for me, in moving to a head of school role, was that, like, how do I sort of reshift my approach, because I just spent most of my career day to day, how do I respond to this, and maybe over the summer you have time to sort of take that deep breath, and I need to be doing that more regularly in my role now.
No, absolutely. I definitely understand that. So the coach that you're mentioning, was he the previous school leader at Walker?
No, it, he is someone who I had gotten to know in a couple of searches. And as I was trying to become a head of a school, interviewing to be a head of a school and trying to project yourself into a head of school role is very different than being a division head or being a head of school. So I had to sort of get better after, get some reps. And one of the things I always would do would be to ask the consultant who was in that search, what is it, what did I not, where did I fall short? What could I do better? And many of them were very nice and just said it just wasn't the right match. It wasn't the right time. And I was like, you're not helping me be better for the next time. And this guy said, do you really want to know what I think? And I said, yes. And he just said, when you answered this question on finance, that's a role you haven't done. So what you said wasn't wrong, but you didn't show command of the room. I would have said this. And he sort of just, modeled an answer for me. And he did that with a few things. And I was like, that was, hard to hear, but really, really, really helpful. And he's someone I just reached back out to at one point in time again, when I had a question about something. And he gave me his time willingly. And he said, by the way, just if if I also do coaching, if you're ever interested in making that. And when I became a head of school, I took him up on that. So it was not the previous head. It was someone who really was, didn't know the school I came and didn't know Walker well either, but had been at a number of different schools. He'd been a former head and had a lot of experience. And just is really good at asking me questions. So while he didn't know Walker, he was really good at asking me questions to get me to think about Walker and how I might, make my impact greater.
I've been thinking of having a mentor myself, somebody who is not from my field but can be like a neutral person, because a lot of connections understand education, so they end up having some expert advice which may not be relevant for me. So I'm always looking for a mentor, and it's been a journey I haven't found yet. But I've heard great things, that when you have this kind of a mentor, it won't put you in a situation where you would need therapy. It's preemptive and it's better.
Yeah. Well, there's a little therapy in it also,
but it's just not reactive.
But yeah, it's someone that I can reach out to and say, I have regularly, monthly meetings, and then can reach out on an as needed basis. And, how are things going? And if I had a bad day or a bad stretch, I can, it's someone who's not in my school. And that's another challenge of being a head, is that it can be a lonely job. So there are some things you can't process with colleagues the way you could before. And so having that sort of person outside to just be able to kind of unload there is some therapy to that, and someone who's been in a position that can understand that and say, well, have you thought of this? Or Or
Yeah.
yes, that's totally normal to feel that way. So he's not a therapist, but some of the value is, that I come out of those sessions feeling like I got some counseling.
No, and the best part is that they care, but they care just enough. In that way,
Yeah,
they are invested in us, but not to the degree like our loved ones, who will get bothered, and you don't want to dump it on
yeah.
them sometimes. So please, Carl, can you share me like few anecdotes or few stories of the quiet leadership style that you have seen from division head to head of school, or you have taken those decisions? Can you share that?
A great day. This is going to sound like this may sound weird. It might be, it might. Well, I'll just. A great day is a day where like I don't get any questions from I don't have a call from parents. I don't have a faculty member who wants to talk to me because something's wrong. I mean, a big part of my job is being there for those moments.
Hmm.
But I feel like if I've done my job really, really well, um, the people that are part of our team and who I trust have done their jobs well, and kept things from coming to me.
Hmm.
The head I referred to earlier at Tampa Prep, who hired me and convinced me to move from New England to Florida, named Kevin Plummer. The first day I got in the job, after I was hired and I started July 1, I show up for the first day of work and sit down, and he said to me, there's two things I'm going to ask you to do for me, like just the highest level. There's two things I need. The first is I need you to do your job well so that things from the upper school are not landing on my desk.
Hmm.
And by that just meant like things that I should be able to handle in my role as a division head. If I handle them well, it's not then asking him to use more bandwidth. And then the other thing he said to me is, so number one, keep things from landing on my desk. Number two, I want a thought partner who can help make Tampa Prep great. And I've used that in every time I've been hiring someone as a head to be part of my senior administrative team. I have used that saying because that really, really resonated with me. So the maybe the quiet part, or if I'm understanding it the right way, is just if he and I have a good relationship and then I as a division head and my upper school team are all in sync and doing our jobs well, those things aren't the problems aren't bubbling up to that highest level, that then becomes something that he has to spend time. He can focus on the strategic long-term thinking, but the other piece is also being invited into being part of that process with him. Like that's, I think most people who want to be leaders have lots of ideas of how they think things can get better. And to be able to have that be a partnership rather than in a bubble is really powerful, and it helps you grow. So I don't know if I'm on the right track in terms of your question, but that's a model that I have in my head and will till I retire. I'm sure it's like, and it can apply at any level when if you're hiring someone who reports to you. I think that idea is can be universal, probably in any field.
No, makes sense. You are trying that your people around are more solution oriented in a way. So I
Yeah.
think that works. Uh, Also would love to understand like what are your current leadership challenges? If you can share that, because a lot of people resonates the most on that.
Um, so I'll say one is the world's changing really rapidly, and just I'm 35 years into my career. That pace of change has quickened along the way. And schools can be again, like any, like a lot of businesses can be slow to change and slow to adapt. And so a challenge is how do you adapt as the world, in times where the world is demanding that you change, in ways that are consistent with the values of your school, the mission of your school. How do you keep that sort of DNA at the heart of what you do, but also create an environment where people are willing to embrace change? And teaching's a really exhausting job.
Yeah.
And those are the majority of our employees are teachers at our school. And and the often the thought of, well, how do I use AI to? I'm just going to pick that because it's the current sort of challenge. how do I do that in a way that isn't just adding to the things on my plate when I'm already working too much and not getting paid enough, which is pretty universal in teaching. Um, so that challenge of just navigating that is at one level.
Mm,
And then then in a whole different direction, part of the independent school model that's different than the public school model is that we are private businesses, which gives us the part of the power of that model is that we can change and adapt faster. It's just we're more nimble because we're one unit rather than a collection of schools and districts and things that fit in a bigger puzzle. But what comes with that is also we have to convince families that our education is $30,000 better than free. And how do you do that? Every independent school has to find their own answer to that question. How do so what is it? What's the special sauce that's going to work for Walker that's going to attract families to want to be part of
mm.
what we think is an incredible school and an incredible product?
No, I didn't. I think enrollment is a problem in everywhere,
Yeah.
even if it's a public school, and even they are. That's one of the biggest problem. And
Yeah.
you rightly put off, right? I think how do you prove your relevance when the world is changing is a very difficult job, and
Mm-hmm.
especially it's whatever we say, the school cannot be agile enough to keep up. You cannot change your branding or your team direction overnight. So
Yep.
even for a year, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 academic year at best to align. And the expectations from parents, the expectations from the society in general, expect the most from the schools. Even
Mm-hmm.
right. So whether it was social media repercussions in a good or bad way, whether it was now AI issues, both in a good and bad way, it's expected that school cater to it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's bring to my question that how do you bring new changes in this way? Like let's say for example AI. How are you right now feeling it? How are you navigating it?
So when ChatGPT came out in October, November, 3 years ago, the sort of the next scheduled faculty meeting that I had, I just started by sharing like, hey, some of you may be fully aware of this, and some of you may not. This might be the first time that you're hearing about this, but this product ChatGPT has come out, and I believe that it is going to be profoundly impactful and will force us to do our jobs differently. And really, all I can say at this point in time is I think that it's critically important for us as a school to not start from a place of fear, but to come at this with our eyes open and an understanding that this is going to happen, and our job is to figure out how to use it the best way. Then we pivoted from there into, okay, well, who are the experts I have? So I have a teacher at my school, who's a teacher, but in leadership. Her name's Emily Adams. She's the chair of our science department, but she's also an innovative chair of innovation at Walker. She was one of the first people that I started having conversations with, bring in the division heads and other members of our leadership team. And we, started having conversations about how can we map this out? So how do we expose it to our faculty so that, that we can back up what I said, like let's not come from a place of fear, because there was an initial wave of like, kids are just going to cheat. Let's just ban it.
Yeah.
That's a natural human reaction. So how do we create professional development for our faculty to just initially expose them to it? Just get them to play with AI, get them to understand it a little bit more. How do we create areas where people can experiment to an extent that stays within sort of the cultural boundaries that we have of what's okay and what's not? Because if you go too far, if one teacher is doing all AI projects in their class and nobody else is, that can cause friction in a school.
Right.
But you need to have places where people have some freedom to experiment, in order to be able to then have. Often the most powerful professional development in schools is teachers sharing with other teachers in the school what they've learned. It's free. It's hearing like, oh, the person 2 doors down from me is doing this. I can do it is a more powerful motivator than, an expert that comes in. So that was sort of the next wave, and aligning policies at the school, and that's something that has, typically schools operate in 1 year at a time cycles. There's so much about a school year calendar that is just every year there's a element of repeat. And AI is changing so fast that it's even pressuring those traditional cycles of like, okay, we know we have a professional, planning day coming up, professional development opportunity. Can we wait this long? And I don't know the right, constantly there's a put your foot on the gas and then put your foot on the brake. We're going too fast. We're going too slow. You're just constantly trying to evaluate that. Because if you go too fast, there's cognitive overload for people and they can shut down. If you go too slow, you fall behind, there's frustration. So that's an art to me is just paying attention and trying to constantly be moving forward.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think the inequity because of AI, the haves and the have-nots, those who are using it and those who are not going to use it, it will be very evident. It will be like miles apart than any equity, I would say, existed before.
Yeah.
And you're right. Waiting till February may not be an option because students are using it anyways. And especially if there is if all the teachers, you cannot have everyone at the same level, but you need everyone to be at least at par to a certain benchmark in the use of AI or understanding about AI. So yeah, I think that's definitely very important. So yeah, I think leadership, like I think in the last few years, COVID was the biggest leadership test. And
Yes.
after that, AI is the next huge challenge. And a lot of teachers, like friends of mine, they're like, we can't catch a break because every now and then there is something coming up where we have to upskill ourselves, and work around. So yeah, I think the AI policy at this classroom level, I think it's not even, you might have a school-wide, district-wide policy, or statewide policy, but I think at the end of the day, every classroom will have to come up with their own, classroom policy because every teacher is gonna look at it and use it differently. So that's going to be a challenge.
It's going to be a challenge. And just touching on something I said earlier, like I do think it's also really important within a school that there's going to be a spectrum. You're going to have your early adopters who are, excited about it and want to dive in, and you'll have the people who just are going to need to be pulled along or pushed along. If you let that span get too big, you can, especially if it's two sixth grade teachers teaching the same subject and one's doing it one way and one's doing it another way, you open yourself up to potential criticism, potential problems. Because if there's a different reason a student's schedule needs to change, it has nothing to do with the sixth grade class. And they had to switch from one teacher to another. That's not going to be a smooth transition if one teacher is going heavy on AI and the other one's using none of it. And that's true with lots of parts of education, of course. But and so you do also need to kind of like move everybody. The floor of what you expect has to move along at a level that's not too far from the ceiling of what you're hoping to get to, so that student experience isn't impacted. And all of that it's part of what it's an incredible challenge. It's also what gets me excited to come to work every day. Is how do you manage that?
Agreed, absolutely. So we did cover a lot of overall topics around the leadership and the quiet leadership style. Would love to know any closing remarks that you have that might be relevant for people who are listening to this podcast.
I've seen a lot of the podcasts that the interviews that you've done, and Chelsea have done. Most of them have been in the public sector. Independent schools make up less than 10% of the total, and so I have chosen a career in independent schools. So I speak from a position of just, one, and even within independent schools, the term independent is everybody can choose to do it in your own way. And so there's a huge range of what it means to be independent schools. I have spent my career at schools that believe in holistic education, that believe in the power of a strong academic program and high expectations. Those are universal. Those work in every setting. I'm really, really, appreciative of the freedom that I have to be able to lead a school and to work with a collection of really amazing people to try to sort of collectively figure out how are we going to solve, the problems that are in front of us. And it's incredibly, incredibly rewarding. I think the field of education is a magical place. We get to influence human lives every single day. And, going back to when I was sitting in a 10th grade class and thought I want to be a teacher, I didn't picture myself sitting in the chair I'm sitting in right now and being ahead of a school. But the ability to impact people is really an incredible opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And there's one last section. So
Yep.
there is a question chain that we have from one leader to another. So there's one question that has been passed on to you from a previous guest that we have. And then, of course, you can also recommend a question for the next guest. So the question that was I I had some previous leader asking me was, how do you let go some people who are not working out? Like, or in a more simple way, how do you fire people? Was the question that he had that he wanted to ask others.
Yeah. So that's a really people who get an education are fundamentally wonderful people. I mean, the vast majority of them, with giant hearts. And part of our job is to take whoever comes into our classroom and get the most out of them. And so, the essence of teaching is that you're just trying to help someone get better in some way. When you get into, and I started as a teacher, so that's still fundamentally at my core. When you get into administration and get to a level of being head, you still have that in you, and firing someone is really that's like you're giving up on a kid at some level.
Yeah.
And that's where I think I've had to learn to zoom out, and you can't make every decision in leadership can't be about what's best for the one person who's sitting right in front of me. And teachers are adults, administrators, staff members, all the employees I have are adults.
Mm.
And if we're going to be a community and a culture that expects or holds high expectations for our kids, we have to do the same thing for our employees. And so if you get to a point where someone's not doing their job well, and hopefully it doesn't have to happen very often, it doesn't at my school, but you have gone through a process of trying to help that person. You've made clear the expectations and where you think someone's falling short, that you have tried to help them grow. You've done your part. And then, when they fall short, or if they fall short of what you've laid out, then you have to think about the children in the classroom or the colleagues in the building who are being impacted by someone who's not operating at the level you need them to. And when you have to have a really hard conversation, it's the worst part of the job. Those are the losing sleep nights. But you treat the person with dignity. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It does, I think that's critically important, is that you still bring kindness and dignity to a conversation. And then you have to just be firm and let that pain wash over you, that they're feeling, and then learn, find your way to let it go. But you can't be afraid of doing it, because your organization can't get better and grow if you're not willing to do that when it needs to happen.
Yeah. I also have one very strong belief system in this, is I never call my team as my family, because I never give up on my family, however they are. So I always believe that an organization is like a team, and you find the best players who can win the team. So it's no personal vendetta. It's just simple increasing odds to win. So in that way,
Yep.
I refrain calling my team as my family.
So I share that wholeheartedly. And I like this bit where people are coming from saying, we're a family when you're in a workplace. That's coming from the best place. But I think you got right at the heart of, you don't fire a family member ever.
Yeah.
And someone a workplace should be a wonderful environment, a place where people want to work and they feel cared for and they feel supported, but it is still a workplace. And that can come across at times as callous to some people. but I think if you explain where you're coming from, people probably all understand that.
Absolutely. So any question that you have that you want me to pass on, and I'll get back to you with an answer.
I will say, just what are the ways that you find balance in your life? Other leaders, that's sort of an eternal challenge. Is how do you take care of yourself in a way? Because the job can be endless if you let it be endless.
Yeah.
You can spend every minute of every day working. There's always more to do, and how do you find that sort of what are your ways of caring for yourself and keeping your battery charged so you can be there for everybody else who needs you?
Lovely question. Definitely, I'll get back to you once I have answer from another school leader. And thank you so much, Carl. I think this has been fantastic, and I loved every second of it. And I can't wait for it to be out there for people to consume.
Excellent. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. This was really fun, and thank you for giving up your time to be with me today also. So
Perfect. Have a
thanks.
good day.